Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Branching PathCast. I'm Marley, and today I'm going to explore language choice and wording in relation to user experience. Let's plumb the depths. The developed vocabulary and grammatical convention in just one language in isolation is both complex and dynamic. The numerous ways in which it is possible to expound on a given thing make for virtually limitless ways in which to bend the meaning around your understanding of things and warp the message to be construed in different lights. There's a simple yet effective diagram that can be found in a book I've previously blogged about that can be found in the link below. It lays bare the many chances there are in the act of transmitting and interpreting information that may introduce error. Taking one position as listener and another as speaker, one can note the different points outlined in the diagram shown, and I'll describe it here. The possible error points exist during the transcription of concept into output by the speaker, then the output being interpreted as input by the speaker, and finally, the processing and interpretation of the determined input into meaning. So in the process, there are 3 points where error may be introduced in the transmission of meaning. Meaning must be transcribed into a shareable format, then that format must be used as input by the second person, and finally, that input is again processed into meaning. Since we exist in a profoundly noisy environment in which to transmit a signal, it is easy to have the meaning purple monkey dishwashered by the time the signal has passed through the many filters. The same process occurs for all manner of intentional signal transmission between parties. The meaning behind the creator, when designing the content of game dialogue and how it is expressed in the function of intended meaning distorted and shaped for the context, then that meaning is read or heard by the player, who must receive that input by a combination of sight and sound. This is then processed into meaning by the player. I hope I'm not being too redundant in describing this. It is things like this that I believe are insidious in their simplicity. The banal nature of these kinds of processes is what allows them to remain unchecked, and unkept filters may lead to degradation of signal purity and lead to increasing distortion. There have been discussion in many areas about the power of language use and the way things are framed. I don't want to really source anything here, as I'm not referencing anything directly, but recounting from a variety of experiences I've taken in over time that range from scientific and cinematic lenses through to neurolinguistic programming and selling knives door to door. Simple things may have great impact, and in my experience, it is useful to practice awareness of these kinds of patterns and lenses to better elucidate meaning. It is acknowledged that there is a limit to the amount of control that any designer may exert on the experience of their creation by another. Intended meaning transmitted through the work may be less ambiguously conveyed. I have spoken before about the heuristic manner in which the mind operates, favoring shortcut solutions that are more likely to yield erroneous conclusions. This process involves the heavy weighting of already held assumptions and contextual information and the rapid processing of signals into understanding. This manner of input digestion is rapid and subconscious, allowing for hasty responses in a continuous dynamic environment rife with signals, most of which are noise, relative to current objectives. The continual processing and analysis of all signals would be obviously overwhelming, and so automated systems dictate focus and awareness, sifting through the environment and prioritizing signals to actively process and interpret based on current significance and relative change. The sensitivity to change and immediate alarm categorization are used to shuffle the priority around and dictate which things are put into focus and which are in the background. The way in which your attention may be overtaken by hearing your name suddenly in a nearby conversation, or by rapid movement detection in your peripheral vision, cause attention to be pulled towards the stimuli at the expense of whatever else was the prior focus in case it holds vital information. There's nothing worse than character assassination, after all. What other death must you live with? The complex connectivity in relational understanding of words, meaning, and the way in which things are understood in light of other things builds a changing, interconnective understanding of the world. When young, there are brief exposures to coffee, for instance. it comes to be linked to properties such as hot, steaming, adult, bitter, and morning. Then it may continue to alter, being linked to other things such as drugs, addiction, industry, ecosystems, and commercials. Perhaps you begin to consume coffee, and it becomes a staple of your daily routine. This will greatly increase the complexity of the meaning linkages of coffee, having bound to increasingly ineffable things like feelings, and coming to be strongly associated with other daily tasks, such as arriving at work, being consumed at a certain time, coinciding with leisurely gossip, or coming to be associated with feelings of decreased stress, even if that is actually paradoxical. These things may become so closely bound that they act as triggers. In this way, things may essentially come to equate with another functionality. The act of noticing it is 10 a.m. automatically leads to the drinking of coffee intent being surfaced from subconscious processes. I recognize this is supposed to be about word use, grammar, and game design, and I feel that this is all relevant. No, you're being defensive. In the case you are developing a message that you want to convey in a certain way, it is useful to think of these things so that you may give yourself the best chance to clearly express it in a way that is most likely to be received with minimal distortion. I could probably take my own advice concerning this podcast, but I am stubborn in my way of speaking, even though I simultaneously hold that a more simplistic and concise delivery would serve me better. Of course, there is more to the message than the message, if that makes sense. I'm expressing thoughts and ideas in my own way, but I'm also communicating many other things simultaneously, which are being processed and interpreted. My word choice, way I'm saying things, and the order in which I'm saying it all feed into the overall interpretation of the meaning and serve to add onto the understanding of the character and related properties of myself and of this podcast. For example, I have been told that I may come across as arrogant when I initially meet people. This was communicated to me by someone whom I met through a university class that I was not comfortable in and in which I was being crushed. I was anxious and withdrawn in that setting, remaining uncomfortable in general. This lends my interactivity or lack thereof with people to be unnaturally bereft of more natural behavioral signals, and my combination of rigid posture, blunt relatively expressionless delivery, and lack of bid reciprocation could easily be interpreted as haughty as opposed to frightened or anxious. The unexpected behavior I exhibited may be combined with other factors, such as the projection of how they felt in the environment, which was reasonably comfortable, and the environment, which was a university already linked to pomp. It can be used to help bend perception in one way versus the other. There are small things that may alter greatly ways in which things are taken. I have been, for instance, connecting ideas together using the word but in many of my sentences. This is a way of communicating that naturally trivializes or downplays the first section in favor of highlighting the second portion. I could give you more examples, but it is not that important. In the previous sentence, which part stood out to you more? The indication that it was not important is given more weight, and what is less important is that I could have given more examples. Another way of saying this would be to say, I can give you more examples, and it is not that important. This may sound slightly odd, and it is given the same weight to each portion. It lets them both exist on the same level. I'm going to use and in place of but for the rest of the podcast, and I'm wondering if you will notice a tonal difference in the things presented. This is commonly used in therapy and coaching as well, which is the source of the connector and at the same time. For instance, I recognize I am feeling anxious when I'm in a university setting, and at the same time, I appreciate that the relative outcome and actualization of feared events are unrealistic. This makes the point equal in gravity and allows for the validation of the first section while also framing things with the second. There has been a similar exploration of the use of because and the impact it may have on persuasion. Asking someone to do something without providing a reason is more likely to result in a denial relative to the same proposition with an attached reason, even if that reason is trivially obvious or somewhat ludicrous. Here, I would like to point to specific research as an example. The paper, The Mindlessness of Ostensibly Thoughtful Action, The Role of Placebic Information in Interpersonal Interaction by Ellen Langer, in which she has someone violate the Western norm of line formation by attempting to move to the front to use the copier in an office setting. The people had less success in circumventing the line if they had merely asked versus when they offered a reason, including if the reason given was because they needed to make some copies. Note that this is likely an identical reason to the others waiting in line, but there is a non-trivial sway in how much difference presentation makes in language. Many other factors may go into the interpretation of the meaning of a signal, such as the framing and support of congruent ideas and the blindness to dissonant components within the held world. Core beliefs are strongly held generalizations that act as heuristic anchors and are repeatedly used to filter things down in a consistent and useful way. This also plays into the interpretation of meaning when taking in information. As our evaluation of things is necessarily done contrasting other things, it is also very powerful to provide anchors for understanding prior to the purposeful presentation of related ideas. This can be seen from the design of game show questions and digital storefronts through to shopping malls. How is one supposed to know the inherent value of something? Many times, the marketing of a product at a very high price, then having it go on sale, is an effective way to make it seem like a great deal. This high anchor price need not be reasonable, and it is likely the sale price that is closer to the actual target price in which the seller hopes to seal the deal in some cases. A similar tactic is often seen in product funnel endpoints, where 3 options are provided. There is a cheaper one that doesn't offer much value, an expensive one that seems like it's overkill, and a happy medium that is a good balance of the two. The stuff that most people are really interested in is contained in the middle option, and the price seems like it's not too bad considered the alternative high price bundle. It also may seem like you're getting a good value relative to the cheap bundle. The positioning of these deals is mainly not to encourage people to purchase the cheaper or more expensive bundle, but to increase the likelihood that the middle option is purchased. Without these contrasting options, the middle bundle alone is more ambiguous, lacking the contrasting points in which to highlight the perceived value add and cost. As the information is being conveyed within a context, such as through a character or in an environment, this is also information about that space as a whole. The way in which they may request something or the phrasing used may go a long way towards the feeling of the character. Alongside what is said, the absence of reaction, or what is not said, can make for an equally impactful sense of who they are, and playing in this negative space must be done with care. If there is not trust built up between the developer and the audience, then the lack of response or engagement with something can come across as negligence or invalidation of expression or consequence. There are many ways to signal things to the audience, and so when there is an absence of meaning in one or many signal types, there must be one at some point to engage with the relevant content that begs addressing. In this way, the continued honoring of expression, story beats, and character arcs may remain intact. When there's a focus on dialogue or writing, it can become easy to lean on that aspect in too strong of a way. Depending on the mechanics of game uses and the collection of expressive signals that the game is using, there may be different sets of options available to signal throughout parts of the game. The use of simultaneous signals may boost the message, where contradictory signals may cancel the meaning out in place of noise or ambiguity. These signal methods may be used in a purposeful and coordinated way to better manage the current tone and to introduce a more nuanced signal expression. The signals do not always have to operate in a manner that amplify one another, and signals that are expressing somewhat contrasting or contradicting messaging may help to convey more complex messaging that is a step in complexity higher than consistently synchronous signal messaging or signal switching, in which there is one signal actively messaging at a given time. The clarity or complexity of conveyance, past the mental processing required to appreciate the message, also impacts the flow that is possible. At times, it is appropriate to be more verbose, while other times it may be better to constrain messaging to clear, simplistic terms. The common way of managing a quest log is to make it overall extremely clear. When this is not done, the information is generally superfluous. This kind of design, alongside the unnecessary nature of it, as really it is usually enough to follow a selected pathway. There's no incentive to engage with the stated drive behind the actions undertaken. This is also true for many character dialogue encounters. The information may be irrelevant or heavy-handed. Where it rests in the middle, with a mixture of meaningful statements and important informational fragments, there lies the sweet spot. The mixture of utility and mystery allows for engagement with what is being communicated and does not detract from the focus of the game to expound on deep lore without impact. The pacing of the game can be controlled with the density of dialogue and the ratio of necessary and unnecessary information. It is risky to veer into the realm of being too verbose or too concise. Just ask my editor, which is also myself. This is not going to be a rigid target to aim for. Rather, it is a consequence of anchored assumptions based on the way the initial portion of the game handled information density and utility ratio and messaging during a similar context. The given expectation is anchored based not only on recent interactions, but also dependent somewhat on state. There is interesting research into the impact of state in the ability to recall memories or to access states of mind. The context in which things are occurring is also meaningful in relation to similar contexts regarding expectation. When one enters a quiet town, there is going to be a naturally greater allowance for digression, while in a more hostile situation or during something that has a time pressure, even when artificial, that'll actually reduce the acceptance for signals that are not directly relevant or that are inappropriately noisy. This can be used in a hostile way to a purpose, and it should be done only in a purposeful manner. I hope that this has been insightful and that you have been able to walk away with something. I'm curious what kinds of thoughts and responses people have. If you would be so inclined, feel free to reach out through email, through a link in the description, or through YouTube comments, if that is your favorite place to dwell. Of course, subscriptions, likes, dislikes, all that jazz is appreciated. Please check out the description for links of relevant sources that I have drawn from. So pick your favorite signal to transmit me a message and visit BranchingPath.com, the hideous goblin dwelling where everything lurks. I'm Marley, and I'll catch you on the flip side.